Montana Territory, 1881. The wind scraped low across the hills near Judith Basin where the snow still clung to the edges of the cottonwoods, and a woman too pale for prairie life stepped off the westbound stagecoach. Liora Gaines coughed into her handkerchief, the white linen stained faint with red. She stood straight anyway, her spine held up by something stronger than her narrow frame. The station master did not bother to hide his surprise. "You come all this way alone?" he asked, eyeing her slight figure, the carpetbag she struggled to keep upright, and the worn doctor's letter poking out of her coat pocket. "I did," she said, her voice soft but sure. "The air is better here." He muttered something about folks not lasting long out here if they break easy, but she had heard worse. Back in Kansas, they had said she was too frail for marriage. Too thin. Too pale. Too sickly. No man would want her. No man should have to bury her. She had come west anyway. A wagon waited just beyond the station. The driver was a tall man with dark hair tucked beneath a dusty hat. His coat was patched at the elbow, and he leaned against the rail with the patience of someone used to being alone. He looked up when she stepped onto the platform, and his gaze held there. "You Liora Gaines?" he asked, stepping forward. I am Merritt Tate. Your brother sent word before he passed. Said you might still come, and if you did, I was to take you to the cabin. I helped him build it. He was a good man." Leora's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you." He took her bag without asking and helped her up into the wagon with a hand under her elbow. His touch was careful, respectful. He did not look at her like she was glass. They rode in silence for a while. The trail stretched long over the hills, the land wide and open. She breathed deep. The air was cold and clean, and it burned her lungs in the best way. "You do not talk much," she said after a while, glancing sideways. "I talk when there is something worth saying," he replied. She smiled, just a little. It was the first time in a long time. The cabin was tucked into a rise near a creek. Smoke curled from the chimney. He helped her down, opened the door, and stepped back to let her in first. "It is not much, but it is solid," he said. Inside was a stove, a cot, shelves lined with supplies. Everything neat. Everything made with hands that cared. "Did you build all this?" she asked. "I did. With your brother." She turned to him. "Why help me?" He looked at her for a long second. "Because you came. That takes something." She did not answer, but she did not look away. The weeks passed steady. Merritt came by most mornings, chopped wood, checked traps. Left food on the porch when she was not feeling well. He never lingered, never intruded, but she started to look for the way he walked from the trees. The way he always knocked once before coming in. The way he said her name like it belonged here. One afternoon, she stepped outside to find him mending the fence. He looked up, surprised. "You should be resting." "I felt strong today." He studied her, then nodded toward the fence post. "Come here. I will show you how to twist the wire." She learned slow, but he never rushed her. Her hands were small, but steady. She laughed when she finally got the wire tight enough. He looked over at her then. Really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "I was not supposed to live past 20, she said quietly. He set down the tool and turned toward her. "How old are you now?" 23. He nodded. "Seems to me you are doing just fine." She blinked fast, and he looked away politely, giving her time. But her tears did not fall. Instead, she smiled. That evening he brought supper. They ate inside, side by side at the small table. She watched the way he cleaned his plate, the way he offered her the last biscuit without thinking. When the fire burned low, he stood. "I will head back. Storm coming." She stood too. "Merritt." He paused at the door. "Do you think someone like me could ever be enough? For someone?" He turned slow. "I think someone like you is more than enough," he said. Her breath caught, but he just tipped his hat and stepped out into the dark. The storm hit hard that night. The wind howled through the cracks. She sat by the fire, pulling her shawl tight, but her thoughts were not on the cold. They were on him. The next morning, she found a bundle on her porch, extra firewood, a jar of honey, and a note, folded and simple. "If you need me, I will come." 2 days later, she did need him. She was out near the creek when her legs gave out. She had walked too far. The ground tilted, her chest burned, and the last thing she saw was the sky. When she came to, he was there. He had carried her back. She could feel it in the way her ribs ached and her braid had come loose. "I told you to take it slow," he murmured, brushing the hair from her face. "I was not trying to be brave," she said, her voice faint. "I just wanted to see the hawks nesting." He let out a breath and sat beside her cot. "You scared me." She reached for his hand. "I am tired of being the one who's always too weak." "You are not weak, Liora," he said, gripping her fingers. "You are strong enough for all the things that matter." Her hand curled into his. "Stay." He did. After that, he came every night. He taught her how to shoot, how to ride, how to listen to the land. And she taught him how to laugh, how to sit quiet and hold still, how to believe in things that could grow even in the hardest soil. One afternoon, he brought her a length of leather and taught her how to braid it. "3 strands," he said. "You and me and the life we are building." She looked up at him, eyes wide. He smiled gently. "If you will have me." She did not answer with words. She just leaned forward and kissed him. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was real. And Merritt Tate, the cowboy who never rushed anything, kissed her back with everything he had. The people in town still whispered. They called her too frail for marriage. But Merritt stood firm. And together, they braided their fates into one. The spring thaw came slower than expected. Snow lingered along the shaded slopes and the creek ran high, pulling stray pine needles into its current. Liora stood just beyond the cabin's back stoop, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching the meltwater curl around stones the size of her fists. Merritt was downriver, boots sunk deep in mud, checking the line where he'd strung traps for muskrat. "You ever think it's strange?" she called out, raising her voice over the water. "That something so cold can give way to green?" He straightened, lifted a stick from the bank, and tossed it into the current. "I think it's the only way the green shows up at all." She stepped closer to the water, careful where she placed her feet. "They're nesting again. The hawks. I saw one swoop down near the ridge this morning." He wiped his hands on a cloth from his coat pocket and climbed the hill toward her. "Think they'll stay this time?" "They always do," she said, brushing hair from her cheek. "Even after storms." He looked at her a long moment, the morning light catching in his eyes. "You want to see them up close? I'll take you tomorrow, if you think you're ready for the climb." She turned toward him, expression steady. "I don't want to be careful forever." He didn't speak right away, only reached down, brushed dirt from her skirt hem with the back of his hand. "Then we'll go slow, but we'll go." They left at dawn the next morning, riding out with a tin of biscuits and a blanket rolled tight behind the saddle. The trail up the ridge was narrow and damp, but Merritt rode ahead, clearing fallen branches with a hand axe, nodding when it was safe to follow. Liora didn't speak much, but her eyes stayed sharp, taking in the moss clinging to the rocks, the soft hum of insects waking from the thaw. Near the top, they dismounted and walked the last stretch. She leaned on his arm once, only briefly, and he didn't mention it. When they reached the clearing, she pressed a hand to her chest and let out a breath. Above them, 2 hawks circled wide and slow, their wings catching the light like burnished copper. He laid the blanket down in the grass and sat beside her. The wind tugged at his collar. "You ever wish you'd gone somewhere else?" she asked. He pulled a blade of grass between his fingers. "I tried once. Idaho mines. Didn't take to it. Too many men digging holes they didn't know how to fill." She turned her head. "And here." He looked at the valley below where the creek wove like thread through the trees. "Here feels like something you can build on, even if it takes time." She studied his profile, the way the sun caught the ridge of his jaw. "What would you build if time weren't in the way?" He didn't answer right off. Then, quiet. "A place that didn't need guarding, where you could rest." Her hand found his in the grass. "You think you could rest, Merritt?" He turned his palm up beneath hers. "I might, with the right person." The silence that followed felt full. She didn't look away from him. Back at the cabin that evening, she lit the stove while he brought water in from the barrel. She moved with more ease now, though she still sat to catch her breath after too much time on her feet. He noticed but didn't mention it. She opened the tin of biscuits, placed 2 on a plate, and then paused. There's a patch of land behind the cabin. Long as a wagon. Gets good sun. He glanced up. Thinking of planting? I'm thinking of staying. He set the water down. Liora. She met his eyes steady. You said once the green only comes after the cold. I think I believe you. He crossed the room slow. Stopped in front of her. I want a life, Merritt. Not just days strung together. And I want it with you. He reached up, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Then we'll build it. That night, he didn't sleep on the cot by the door. He stayed beside her, boots off, coat folded on the chair. No words were needed. She curled into his chest, and he held her like something that wasn't fragile at all, but solid and warm and already part of him. Outside, the creek ran smooth. Inside, spring had already taken hold. The first rain of the season came sudden and hard, drumming against the roof with a rhythm that made sleep uneasy. Liora lay awake beneath the quilt, listening to Merritt's breath steady beside her. The soft rise and fall of his chest against her back, a comfort she still wasn't used to. She didn't stir him, not when thunder rolled over the hills, not when her mind wandered back to the letter her brother had written, the one Merritt had never asked to see. By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving behind a hush that felt like held breath. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in her shawl, and stepped outside. The earth smelled rich and alive, and the air was warm enough to carry the scent of wet pine. She walked to the edge of the clearing, barefoot in the soft mud, and watched steam rise from the grass. Behind her, the door clicked open. You always up this early? Merritt's voice was rough with sleep. Just today, she said without turning. I had a dream I was back in Newton. I was walking down the street and no one saw me. I passed folks I knew, but they all looked through me like I'd already gone. He stepped down into the damp, boots sinking a little. You think dreams mean something? I think they come from somewhere. Whether they mean anything depends on what you do with them. He stood beside her, arms crossed against the morning chill. I had a dream like that once, after my pa passed. I was walking through his corral, but the horses were all gone. Just empty harnesses swinging on the posts. She looked up at him. What did you do with it? I stopped waiting for him to come back. They stood quiet, the only sound the drip of water from the eaves and the call of a magpie in the trees. She reached for his hand without thinking, fingers curling into his. I want to write again, she said. He glanced at her, puzzled. Write what? Stories. I used to. Before I got sick. I'd send them to a ladies' journal in Topeka. They printed one once about a woman who ran a boarding house after the war. My mother said it wasn't proper. Said I was filling my head with nonsense. His thumb brushed her knuckles. You still got that story? No. I burned it before I left. But I remember how it ended. She didn't say more and he didn't press. Later, while Merritt rode out to check on a neighbor's injured mare, Liora pulled a sheet of paper from the desk drawer and laid it flat. She dipped the nib in ink and wrote slowly, her hands stiff from disuse. The words came in pieces, but they came. When the ink dried, she folded the page and tucked it into a book on the shelf. By the time he returned, her hands smelled faintly of iron and paper. That evening, they ate on the porch. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, and the fields shimmered with the last light of day. Merritt leaned back in the chair, boots propped on the rail. Tom McKendry wants to trade for the red heifer, he said, chewing the last of his cornbread. Offered sacks of oats and a new bit. She sipped her tea. You think that's fair? I think the heifer's mean as a mule and kicks every time I get near. Might be fair just to be rid of her. She laughed, a sound she hadn't known she missed. Then trade her. He looked over at her, his face softening in the way it did when he thought she wasn't watching. You sure this life's enough? I don't need more, she said, eyes on the horizon. But I wouldn't mind a bigger table. Maybe 2 more chairs. He blinked, slow. You thinking of company? I'm thinking of possibilities. He didn't answer at first, just reached for her hand and laced their fingers together on the armrest between them. I'd like that, he said finally. Whatever it grows into, I'd like it all. The sun dipped behind the hills. The air cooled. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and neither of them moved for a long time. Inside, the page she'd written lay folded in the book's spine, the ink dry but the words still warm. It began without preamble, just a single line in her neat hand. This is not the story they expected me to live, so I chose to live a better one. By late May, the land had softened into its full color. Wild lupin bloomed in pale clusters along the ridge, and the cottonwoods that shaded the creek had filled in thick with leaves. Merritt had taken to rising early, tending the vegetable rows behind the cabin before the sun burned too hot. Liora joined him when she could, her fingers careful with the young shoots as she weeded between the rows of turnip and onion. One morning, as he lifted the spade to break soil for the last furrow, she paused, brushing dirt from her palms. "I've been thinking about the ledger," she said. He straightened, eyebrows low. "Something wrong with it?" "No. I just noticed we've got more eggs than we need, and the hens are laying steady. We could trade them in town, maybe for flour or bolts of muslin." He leaned on the spade handle, studying her. "You want to take them yourself?" "I want to try." He didn't answer right away, just nodded once and looked toward the barn. Wagons sound. "I'll oil the axles before you go." "I didn't say I'd go alone." "You didn't have to." He didn't argue further. That evening, he sharpened the blades on the cart and laid a clean cloth over the bench seat. She worked beside him, packing the eggs in straw-lined baskets, folding a list of goods she'd written in pencil on the back of a seed packet. They left before sunrise the next day. The road into town traced the curves of the Judith River, and the air smelled of alder and wet stone. Merritt drove with one hand loose on the reins, the other resting on his thigh. Liora sat with her list folded in her lap, watching the clouds shift over the distant peaks. "You ever think about the line between alone and lonely?" she asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "I used to think they were the same. And now I know better." The town of Utica was busier than she remembered from her arrival months ago. A new blacksmith's shed stood at the edge of the main road, and the church had gained a bell tower. She kept her chin lifted as they passed the general store, her shoulders squared beneath her shawl. Merritt unloaded the baskets wordlessly, carrying them two at a time to the porch while she stepped inside. The shopkeeper, Mr. Havers, was younger than she expected, with a beard trimmed close and a slow way of speaking. He took the eggs without fuss, weighing each basket and jotting figures into his ledger. "You're Merritt's wife, then?" She hesitated. "Not by paper." He scratched his head. "Well, I suppose paper don't mean as much as it used to. You're welcome here just the same." She left with muslin, 2 sacks of flour, and a tin of lamp oil. Merritt met her on the porch, eyes flicking briefly to the bundle in her arms. "You did fine," he said. "I didn't ask if I did." "No," he said. "You didn't need to." They stayed in town for supper that evening, seated at the far end of the boarding house table. The meal was salt pork and beans, with hot bread and apples stewed in molasses. Liora ate slowly, listening to the hum of voices around them, ranch hands swapping stories, a woman laughing too loud about a mule that kicked through her barn door. When they stepped outside, the light had gone soft. Merritt helped her onto the wagon seat and paused before climbing up. "You've changed since the first day I saw you," he said. "I've become who I was before I got sick." He nodded, then looked down the road. "You ever think about a church wedding?" She turned to him. "You want one. I want you. Standing beside me however you choose." She reached for his hand, fingers warm against his. "Then let's ask Reverend Samuels next time we come. But I want the vows to be said outdoors. I want to see the land when I promise myself to it." He pulled her hand up to his mouth, kissed the back of it. "You're not promising yourself to the land." She smiled, and the wagon rolled on. Back at the cabin, she folded the muslin into the chest at the foot of their bed, brushing her hand over the fabric. He built a fire in the stove and set water to boil, glancing toward her as he poured 2 mugs. "We could build a second room," he said, "something east-facing, so you can write in the morning light." She turned toward him, heart full. "I'd like that." They sat together then, bare feet tucked close, steam rising from their cups. Outside, an owl called once from the trees, and the wind carried the scent of pine resin through the open window. There was no ceremony yet, no ribbon dress or ring. But the promise was already there, stitched into every shared breath and every quiet look. And it was enough. For now, it was everything. The wedding took place on the first clear day of June under the same cottonwoods that had shaded the cabin since her brother first settled the land. Reverend Samuels arrived by wagon with his wife, bringing a Bible wrapped in oilcloth and a tin of lemon drops she offered shyly to Liora before the vows. They stood with their boots in warm earth, the creek murmuring behind them. Liora wore a dress stitched from the muslin she'd traded for, the seams a touch uneven but hers alone. Merritt wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed, with a collar that didn't quite sit right. His hands were steady when he took hers. "I ain't a man of many words," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "But I know what's true when I see it. You made room in me where I thought there was nothing left. I vow to build with you, not just live beside you." She answered with her hand pressed firm to his chest. "I've been told my whole life to expect less. But I won't do that anymore. I vow to meet you with all I am, no matter the season." The Reverend's voice was low and sure. "By your promises and the witness of this land, I call you bound." They kissed once, brief and soft, her hand still resting over his heart. Mrs. Samuels wiped her eyes and handed Liora a sprig of sweetgrass she'd gathered that morning. "It's for blessing," she said. "So your home always smells of summer." Later, they shared a meal outside, with bread she'd baked the night before and a pie Merritt had traded for in town, a gift from the McKendrys, who'd left a note tucked inside the crate. "For the couple who makes even the hawks settle down." That night, after the Samuelses had gone and the fire had burned to embers, they lay side by side beneath the quilt she'd mended with her own hands. Liora turned on her side, her eyes tracing the shape of his shoulder in the soft light. "I want to raise something here," she said. "Not just plants." He shifted to face her. "Like what? A child? Maybe two." He didn't blink. "You think your body could carry one?" "I don't know, but I want to try." His hand found hers beneath the covers. "Then we'll try." Summer ripened slow after that. The garden filled out, rows of squash and beans climbing the trellis Merritt built from willow branches. Liora rose early, her strength returning in small, steady ways, her breath easier now, her steps firmer. She began writing again in earnest, pages stacking in a wooden box beside the hearth. They added the east-facing room by late July. Merritt took his time with the beams, carving a small hawk into the windowsill as a surprise. When she saw it, she touched the carving with reverence and kissed his jaw. By autumn, they knew she was carrying. The morning sickness came sharp and fast, but she bore it with grit, leaning into his shoulder when she needed steadiness, never apologizing for what her body asked of her. He built a cradle before the first snow, sanding the corners smooth and lining it with wool. She gave birth in the second week of March while the ground was still hard and the creek ran high. The labor was long but not dangerous. Merritt held her hand through the night, whispering nothings that sounded like prayers. When the baby arrived, a girl with dark hair and lungs strong as a spring wind, Liora wept without shame. They named her Clara after Merritt's grandmother, whose name he'd only spoken once and never with ease. Liora washed the baby herself, bundled her in a blanket lined with sweetgrass, and set her gently in the cradle he'd made. The cabin grew quieter after that, but never still. Clara's cries filled the corners with life, and Merritt learned to rock her with one arm while stirring the pot with the other. Liora wrote when she could, sometimes with the baby curled against her chest. Her stories began to change, less about endings, more about beginnings. In the second year, they built a henhouse with a slanted roof and added 2 milk goats to the barn. Merritt taught Clara to walk between the rows, her hands clinging to his fingers. Liora taught her to pat the soil before dropping seeds. They didn't speak much of what might have been the sickness, the solitude, the long road west, but it lived in the way they held each other's gaze, in the quiet touches passed between chores. On Clara's 3rd birthday, Liora placed a bound book on Merritt's lap. The cover was plain, stitched leather, the title pressed in by hand, This Land We Chose. Inside were pages of stories some imagined, some lived, that traced how a woman and a man once found each other when the world had told them they wouldn't last. He opened to the first page, read the first line aloud. She came west looking for air, and found a life full enough to fill her lungs. He looked at her then, eyes warm. You wrote us down. I didn't want to forget how we began. He pulled her close, Clara dozing between them on the porch bench, the evening sun turning the sky to gold. Then let's keep writing it, one day at a time. And they did. The years passed with the rhythm of the land planting, growing, harvest, rest. The cabin grew fuller, the table longer. Another child came, then another. The stories multiplied, the shelves filled, the garden expanded until it touched the trees. But always they returned to the same things, the sound of the creek, the call of the hawks, the warmth of a hand taken in trust. And through it all, Liora and Merritt remained two quiet souls who found, at last, the life they had not dared to dream. Together. Always.